So here's a question. How do you solve the world's problems? Is it with nukes and napalm? Well, those failed. What about art? Ooh, music. Nope, nothing doing. How about superhero comics? Really? By the end of World War II, 9 out of 10 American kids were reading them. And if you don't count adults, that figure jumps to more than half. These cheap pamphlets were so popular, they shaped how we talk, what we wear, how we fight wars, and they might have just saved America. It was the golden age of comics. And our story begins with a bang, or rather a series of bangs. No, not that kind of bang. A bang for your buck. By 1938, 25% of the United States was unemployed. Everyone else was barely staying afloat. No wonder newspapers blared doom from every masthead. So naturally, when Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster released Action Comics #1 that year, featuring a guy who punched meteors for breakfast, everyone lost their minds. Not literally. They couldn't afford that much electricity. But the idea of a working stiff who could take down villains and titans at no extra charge, that was revolutionary. Suddenly, newspapers weren't the only ones dispensing free daily thrills. In fact, Superman coincided with the last gasp of the Great Depression, proving that you didn't need a silver screen to suspend your disbelief. You just needed 4 colorful panels and a dime. But what made Superman so appealing wasn't just his oversized ego and kryptonite weakness. It was also his uncanny knack for taking on the bad guys that regular folks couldn't. And given that most Americans were still struggling to get their lives back on track after the market crash, that proved irresistible. When World War II rolled in, it seemed like the good guys had already taken care of the bad guys. It's no surprise that by 1941, 5 months before Pearl Harbor, nearly 1 million Americans bought the first issue of Captain America. Timely Comics would go on to use the character as a live wire to remind troops and tykes alike that the best was yet to come. Meanwhile, the Man of Steel and the Dark Knight donned Uncle Sam hats and urged readers to pitch in for war bonds. That was millions of small change adding up to serious support. But this wasn't some government program. These heroes weren't official mascots. The comics companies themselves had discovered a moral obligation, maybe not a responsibility, but a golden opportunity to exploit patriotism without getting their hands dirty. Soon the world knew that Batman didn't just strike fear into the hearts of criminals. He was also sponsoring the local drive to make cripples smile. Superman wasn't just rescuing cats from trees, he was also planting trees. The Wonder Woman wasn't just flipping buses over backwards and in heels. She was also flipping out the pages of every romance comic. By the end of the war, 9 out of 10 American kids were reading comics, as were more than half of their parents. Okay, that seems sweet, right? Like a heartwarming habit shared by generations. But let's be real. Kids today spend their days screaming at clouds on Twitter, and their nights screaming at each other on TikTok. Where's the social glue? What happened to community? Well, both parents and kids got something out of those comics. Parents loved them because they were dirt cheap and made kids think books were cool. Kids loved them because they were dirt cheap and made grown-ups seem kind of laughable. For instance, there's the time Superman stopped a runaway train by pushing it. But when he went to shake the conductor's hand, the guy was nowhere to be found. Turns out he'd climbed into a nearby bar to tell his buddies that he'd just met a superhero. In other words, a guy in tights who could lift locomotives was no match for a bottle of beer and a tall tale. For kids, that was priceless. Next thing you know, the comics were slipping into other aspects of American life. Ever heard someone describe an argument as World War III in a coffee shop? Comics did that too. Ever send a text with bam, pow, zap? Comics did that too. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. Before 1940, the word superhero didn't even exist. But by the 1950s, it had entered the American lexicon, in part thanks to psychologist William Moulton Marston, who wrote a treasury of comic lore and helped coin the term secret identity. His influence extended beyond academia. He was also the creator of Wonder Woman, and if all this sounds weirdly familiar, well, you've probably been paying closer attention than you realize. The 1930s and 40s were also when African-American soldiers started using the term. Chitlin Circuit to describe the network of theaters that booked black performers. And the name stuck, inspiring musicians like Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway to form integrated bands that toured the country. Gee, I wonder where the word circuit came from. Or consider the neighborhood kids who used to put on shows in the basement rec room. Someday they'd become Neil Armstrong or Lena Horne. Until then, They were busy putting their own spin on stories they'd read in those dime novels. In the 1960s, Spider-Man would tell them, "With great power comes great responsibility." But without the Golden Age, that saying might have stayed in print. As for the rest of us, well, we got the gift of knowing that Batman's cape wasn't that different from Wonder Woman's.